Welcome to the lovely city of Hong Kong, where I'm currently staying at the Courtyard Hong Kong Sha Tin. And wait, what's this bracelet on my arm here? And why am I eating quarantine food again? This is the story of the worst travel mistake I've ever made. Okay, let's get this out of the way. I'm gonna keep this one mostly off the cuff. I'm gonna tell you guys the story of the worst travel mistake I've ever made in my life so far, and how I ended up in another 14 days of quarantine once again here in Hong Kong. Totally unexpected, totally 100% my own fault, and here's the story. So basically, as you guys know, I've been traveling in China for the past month. I've been visiting my family, and my thought was that towards the end of the trip, I would visit Hong Kong for a few days before going back to Canada. Now, the reason I'm able to visit Hong Kong is because I have one of these things, a Hong Kong permanent resident ID card, because I used to live here when I was younger. So I have the permanent resident ID card. I'm able to enter Hong Kong as a permanent resident, but I would normally have to quarantine for 14 days, with the exception right now of people who are coming from the mainland actually can skip the quarantine through what's known as the Return to Hong Kong scheme that the Hong Kong government is offering. If you've been in the mainland for the past 14 days or so, and you haven't been in any medium to high risk areas, you're able to enter Hong Kong and avoid undergoing the 14-day quarantine as long as you fulfill a bunch of conditions. Now, one of these conditions is getting a negative COVID-19 PCR test at a hospital in the mainland in Guangdong province, which is the bordering province to Hong Kong, that's mutually recognized by the Hong Kong government and the Guangdong provincial government. So I look at the list of mutually recognized institutions, and this was where I made my first major mistake. You see, in the city of Shenzhen, which is the bordering city to Hong Kong on the other side of the border over in mainland China, there's two hospitals with very, very similar names. One of them is Shenzhen Shi Fuyou Baojianyuan, or Shenzhen Women and Children's Hospital. The other one is Shenzhen Shi Futianqu Fuyou Baojianyuan, or Shenzhen Futian, which is the district, Women and Children's Hospital. So I think you can see where this is going. Obviously, as you guys can probably guess, only one of the hospitals, which was the first one, Shenzhen Shi Fuyou Baojianyuan, without the Futianqu in the name, without the district in the name, only that hospital is actually on the list of recognized institutions where I could get a PCR test that would exempt me from the quarantine, but I did not pay enough attention while looking at this list, and I went to the second hospital instead. So on Tuesday, I went and got my PCR test. I thought everything was going smoothly. On Wednesday, I got my negative test results. I thought that that would, tick the boxes. I would be exempt from quarantine upon crossing the border into Hong Kong. And then I proceeded to cross the border. This is where I get to my second grave mistake, which is even more inexcusable than the first. I mean, the first one, you can kind of say that like the two hospital names are very, very similar. It is what it is, right? Like, it's an easy mistake to make. Somebody calling themselves a travel expert like myself shouldn't be making that mistake, but you can kind of understand how a mistake like that would be made. But the second mistake is downright inexcusable, and that's the fact that on the Return to Hong Kong website, it very clearly states that upon getting your negative test results in Shenzhen, in Guangdong province on the mainland, you need to transmit that test result through like this online system that they've set up to the Hong Kong government and obtain the green code from the Hong Kong government side that will show that you are in fact allowed to be exempted from quarantine. So you basically need to get your negative test results, get a green code on the Chinese side, and then transmit that to the Hong Kong side, get your green code there, and that's how you know that you'll be allowed into Hong Kong and allowed to skip the quarantine. On my part, I got my Chinese green code because I got my negative test result, and I neglected to do that last step of transmitting it to the Hong Kong side. I knew I had to do the step. I knew that that was part of the whole process, but I got very complacent. I assumed in my head that oh, I've got a Chinese green code here. Surely that means that I will get a Hong Kong green code whenever I decide to transmit it. And at the time, obviously, I didn't know that the hospital that I went to was in fact not on the list of approved hospitals. So I was very complacent there. And keep in mind that if I did in fact transmit it before crossing the border, I would have realized that the hospital wasn't the right hospital. I would have gotten a pink code instead on the Hong Kong side, and I would have had the chance to say, okay, I'm going to push back my entry into Hong Kong. I'm going to go to one of the approved hospitals, get my PCR negative test, and then let's say cross the border tomorrow. I would have had that opportunity. But in fact, I didn't transmit the green code until I had actually crossed the border outside of China. I had already exited China, and my visa into China was only a single entry one. And so you can kind of guess what happened. I found myself in the no man's land between China and Hong Kong. If any of you have been to the border, the land border between the special administrative region of Hong Kong and the mainland, you'll know that there is in fact that no man's land after you exit one side and before you enter the other. And it was only in that no man's land was I prompted to say, oh, you've got to transmit your green code over to the Hong Kong side. Go ahead and do that now. And upon doing that is when I got a pink code instead. And to my utter shock and dismay, I was told that I would have to quarantine if I wanted to enter Hong Kong. Gosh. So in that moment, I was screwed. I was totally screwed. I did not have the option to return back to China. First of all, I did not have a valid visa on me anymore, so even entering through the border was not an option. Even if I did though, even if I did have, let's say, a multiple entry visa, I would still have to quarantine in Shenzhen upon entering. And if I wanted to proceed into Hong Kong, well, I don't have the green code that exempts me from quarantine. I've only got a pink code. Even though I have the right to enter, right, with my Hong Kong ID, I would have to do a 14-day quarantine, which is what's required for people who are entering from the mainland without that green code. Let me tell you, in that moment, when I just realized how screwed I was, basically every win, every success story, every amazing travel experience I've had as a traveler over the past many years, all of that seemed to count for nothing. It just felt like I've made, the stupidest mistake in the world. Well, two mistakes actually, two very major mistakes, without either of which I would have been totally fine, right? If I had tested at the right hospital, I would have my green code, I'd be able to enter Hong Kong. If I had transmitted the code to Hong Kong, I would have realized my mistake before being trapped in the no man's land. So I just felt like the biggest dunce, the biggest idiot in the entire world. I had to sit down for a little bit in the little holding pen in that border area. And after many hours of thinking over things, I really didn't have a choice. So yeah, I looked at the list of quarantine hotels that they had. Not every hotel would have rooms, right? Since I was making a booking the day of for 14 nights. And so fortunately, there was at least this hotel, a Courtyard by Marriott here in the Sha Tin area, which had rooms for 14 nights. So anyway, that's basically the story of the two very inexcusable travel mistakes that I made that conspired together to bring me into this situation, like I mentioned. I'll share with you guys a little bit more, thoughts about the whole situation and reflections and how I'm trying to deal with it, how I'm trying to cope with it. But first, we may as well take a look around the room. We may as well talk a little bit about what hotel quarantine in Hong Kong is like, because I don't think I'll be willing to document this whole experience with quite the same enthusiasm as I did for my Shanghai quarantine. Back then it was necessary and a little bit of a novelty, and now it's just kind of a frustrating experience, as you can imagine. Although, like I mentioned, I totally, completely acknowledge that it was entirely my fault. But anyway, before we get to the thoughts and reflections and yeah, how I'm dealing with the situation, let's take a look around the room and I'll walk you through a bit of the quarantine procedures. Welcome to the Premier River View room here at the Courtyard Hong Kong Sha Tin. I have not bothered to clean up, so stuff is kind of everywhere. As you can see, this is the bathroom. It's pretty straightforward. It's basically everything you need from a quarantine hotel. Over here we've got the bedroom. King-sized bed where I must sleep for the next 12 nights now. Down here, we have these saliva collection kits, which Hong Kong insists that I drip my saliva into on these specified dates on each sample, and then I'm supposed to drop it off at a sample collection point in the city after I leave my quarantine. The fact that I do have a negative COVID test, even though it was not recognized by the Hong Kong government, seems to not play a role in the fact that I need to collect my saliva all the time. This is my workspace right here. Here's my lunch. And here's the river view, in case you were wondering. As you can see, there's a little slice of the river there, and there between all the buildings. And rather agonizingly, I've also got this view of the swimming pool where I get to watch people having fun with their lives while I'm stuck inside. Now, even though I'm a Titanium Elite member with Marriott Bonvoy, I did not get upgraded to a suite, although I did ask, and I was told that, well, they've only got one floor for quarantine guests, and I guess the implication was that no suites were available. But look at this. There are suites, or at least some bigger rooms on this floor. I somehow doubt that they're all occupied, but anyway, it's too late now. And just in case you were wondering, outside the door I've got my little table, I've got a place to put my trash outside, and I'm not allowed to leave. Let's talk about the food, which is kind of interesting because as part of the room service package here at the Courtyard Hong Kong Sha Tin, I do get to order a different breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day according to my preferences. And so far, I've quite enjoyed the Japanese breakfast set in the mornings. I don't really like any of the lunch options, although I haven't tried all of them yet. I thought the sesame salmon was fine. And then for dinner, the only really delicious thing that I've had so far is gotta be this crab meat and corn salad. Otherwise, the beef hanging tender cubes with garlic and penny. I mean, you can't really tell what that is from the description, but it's actually pretty good. It's just beef pasta. I've also had the fried rice noodles with beef and scrambled eggs. I wish I could say that it tasted better than it looked, but alas, it did not. All right, let's talk about the costs that I've had to incur as a result of my silly mistakes, right? The additional unexpected costs in this trip. So the Courtyard Hong Kong Sha Tin, which is where I'm staying right now, infuriatingly is a Category 2 hotel with Marriott Bonvoy. So a free night stay, if I were able to redeem Bonvoy points for these 14 nights, one night would only cost me, what is it, like 12,500 points, which I would be very willing to pay if I could. However, because the 14-day quarantine is a special rate that the hotel must arrange on their end, I'm not able to, redeem points for it. Instead, it costs me 800 Hong Kong dollars per night for the room, and the room doesn't come with food included, unlike my quarantine hotel back in Shanghai. Food is either room service or a meal plan of 400 Hong Kong dollars per day. I'm not allowed to order delivery from, outside food places, although I can receive parcels. And so between room service and the meal plan, I just decided to get the meal plan just to keep things simple. So overall, I'm looking at a cost of 1,200 Hong Kong dollars per day. Times that by 14 days, that's about 2,100 US dollars all in, or about 2,500 Canadian dollars all in. So definitely not a small expense. There is one silver lining, in as much as a situation like this can have silver linings, and that's the fact that when it's finally time to fly back to North America, I will have been outside of the mainland China for 14 days, which means I can fly into the States and cross the land border back to Canada and thereby avoid doing the frankly ridiculous, right, $1,000 to $2,000 Canadian hotel quarantine for 3 days. I can just go straight home. So there is that silver lining. I will save on the cost of the hotel quarantine in Canada, but overall, it's still a pretty sizable additional cost that I have to deal with. There's no explanation for it besides sheer complacency. Like I looked at the page many times, but each time I was like, oh yeah, return to Hong Kong. I've got the Hong Kong ID. I've got the quota. Just do a PCR test in Shenzhen. Like, what could go wrong? And it's a really humbling reminder to me that, especially during these times, you really got to be paying attention to every single little detail, all the ever-changing border controls, quarantine rules, travel restrictions that we're going to have to deal with over the next few years as travel picks back up again, as it becomes feasible to travel smoothly internationally again. I think as much as we would all like to look forward to, and as we are looking forward to travel resuming internationally, the reality is that there are still a lot of restrictions to deal with, and international travel might be enjoyable after all this time, but it's not going to be easy. And I don't think it's going to be a situation where you can really let your guard down, because any little mistake or a series of unfortunate coincidence of mistakes, such as in my situation, can be very costly. And I've certainly paid a pretty significant cost in terms of time and money as a result of my mistakes. And, for a long time, even like months ago, I've written on princeoftravel.com that any international travel over the next few years is going to involve a certain level of risk that you have to be comfortable with. Part of that risk may involve being quarantined suddenly, like unexpectedly, just because of, whether it's because of a local COVID-19 outbreak or because of, in my situation, my own mistakes and my own doing, which, to be fair, I never expected that this would happen to me. But hey, that's something I've said in the past. I've made my bed, and now I have to quite literally sleep in it for the next 12 nights. And speaking of sleep, I do look forward to catching up on sleep a little bit. To be honest with you guys, I think part of the reason that I made the 2 mistakes that I did, probably a large part actually boils down to a lack of sleep that I've gotten on this trip. As some of you may know, I've been working really hard to juggle travel and family time and work with Prince of Travel. And honestly, for the past 2 weeks before this, I had gotten maybe like 4 or 5 hours of sleep per night if I was lucky. So yeah, I think that could have definitely been a big contributor to me just not being at my sharpest and missing some of these key details that I really should not have missed. And maybe this is a sign that, yeah, like as important as work and travel and stuff, as important as they are, none of them would really be possible if I'm not at my sharpest, if I don't get enough sleep. So I'm going to try to catch up on sleep over the course of these 2 weeks for sure. Aside from that, in terms of what I'm going to be doing in quarantine, how I'm going to be passing my time, well, part of me takes comfort in the fact that I've been through this experience once before. I kind of know what to expect, and I kind of know that I can't allow myself to dwell on my mistakes too much. I can't allow myself to get too bummed out by the fact that I'm stuck in a hotel room for 14 days. This wonderful city of Hong Kong is out there. I just can't go outside. Because if I get too bummed out by it, then yeah, I'm not going to stay sane in this room for very long. So instead, I think the plan is, yeah, I have to keep myself busy. I have to, be productive and catch up on sleep. And the football tournament, the Euro 2020 or 2021, is also on right now, so I can watch some football to pass the time. But basically, I have to keep myself busy, keep myself occupied. Oh yeah, I can go back to doing my floor workouts over on the floor over there. Little blast from the past from Shanghai quarantine. But yeah, if I spend too long sitting by the windowsill, looking out and just feeling ashamed, feeling embarrassed, feeling regretful about the 2 mistakes that I had made, then that's not going to be too positive of an outcome at the end. It's not gonna be too long. I feel like it's gonna go by pretty quickly, and then I'll be back doing what I was gonna do in Hong Kong, and then finally coming back to Canada after an unexpected delay. But anyway, that's kind of the story of how I managed to get myself quarantined again, even though I was eligible to skip quarantine, and some of my thoughts and reflections on the whole ordeal. I think, everybody makes mistakes. Learn from my mistakes, don't make similar ones. Definitely pay close attention to any border restrictions or quarantine exemptions or anything like that. Don't allow yourself to be complacent like me. But every traveler makes mistakes. Every traveler has to grow and learn from their mistakes. I think when you travel, you really expand yourself to a wide range of possibilities, right? That's kind of what it's all about for me. And in this case, I hit upon one of the more negative, one of the more unfavorable, unwelcome possibilities. And that's just a part of the whole travel experience. I do hope that in a couple of years' time, I'll be able to look back on this whole mishap, on this whole ordeal, maybe on this exact YouTube video, and yeah, just look back with a sense of poignancy, right? As though this really exemplifies what international travel was like during this era, during this very tough era that we are all going through, but that we're emerging out of. I hope you enjoyed the video, even if it was at my expense somewhat. I hope you learned something about paying closer attention, taking more care as you start to think about your own international trips, perhaps later this year, perhaps early next year. And wherever you're tuning in from, I hope you're having a better week than I am. Although I do think it's important to say that I'll be okay. I'll be dealing with this just fine. It is ultimately a first world problem as somebody who chose to travel of my own volition, and it's important to take accountability for my own mistakes. I'll see you in the next video.